today it is my privilege to introduce the speaker for the day. Come on in and sit down. I just started yakking. Contrary to popular belief, Jana Dumas is not a cyclist, but an outdoor adventurer who has traveled to more than 40 countries, although she's gone through many of those by bicycle. I'd say she's a cyclist. Jana is an author, a teacher, and a mother, and a business owner. She currently lives in the county with her husband and 2 young children. She teaches junior grades at Bayside Public School in Belleville. Jana has written 2 books, a children's book which was published in Egypt called This is Africa. She wrote it to raise money for an impoverished school. Her current book that we are going to hear about today is called Closer to Quiet, which takes the reader on her journey from the north of Africa through the center of the continent to Cape Town. Half the proceeds from her book are donated to the TDA Global Cycling Foundation. The foundation gives books to children in small African villages, some of which Jana visited on her journey. Today she's going to take us on her journey of 12,000 kilometers through the heart of Africa from Cairo to Cape Town. Welcome, Jana. Thank you.
Thank you for joining today. It's pretty exciting to be all together as a community, and I love sharing this adventure because it was such a meaningful one in my life, so I appreciate you coming and listening. Yes, so Closer to Quiet is the story of my 12,000 kilometer bicycle trip down to Africa. We went through 10 different countries when we went on this bicycle trip, and they were all so unique. So you cross an arbitrary line in the sand or in the dirt, and suddenly the culture shifts in a big, big way. So it was very interesting to learn about the different cultures that exist, some of the different cultures that exist in Africa. People always say to me, you must be a cyclist because you are able to cycle for 5 months at a time. That is simply not true, and I'll give you perfect evidence how I know it's not true. This is a man in Kenya who, this was a slight uphill slope. He's rooting for me. He sees that I'm not doing very well, and he has a single speed bike. I have a 9 to 10, it was a 10-speed bike at the time, and he was passing me with his entire family on a single speed bike. So I know I'm not a cyclist. I don't understand technical bicycle language. I am just okay at changing a tire, and I don't wear the appropriate Lycra or know what a Peloton is, but I do love to travel, and I love to do it by bicycle because you're outside and you're in nature and you're communicating with people and animals, and it just really gives you a sense of a country when you're outside all the time in the country. So I do tell people I'm not a cyclist. In fact, I don't think I've cycled since this trip, but I'm planning my next long voyage by bicycle, so I don't know what it is. A little madness perhaps. People always say, where did this idea come from? You never cycled when you were a teenager, early 20s. How did you end up on this big voyage? And it was really the convergence of 3 main events in my life when I was 23. And it was these 3 events. So first of all, I was in the Canadian artillery. Hey guys. And I was an artillery officer, and I was training to run courses out of F.O.W.L. I was going to be a course officer. And so I needed to be really fit. There's a lot of room. I was really trying to get in shape so that I could prove myself to all of the very macho military men that would be learning physical education from me. And so I was very motivated to be in good shape. I also had a plan with my dear friend on the left, Lauren, to take a car across Canada once we were done university, which was the year following. We were going to drive across Canada, get to know our own country, and then stay in Newfoundland for a little while and see what our next steps may be. And the third convergence was my parents owned this property called Birch Lodge, which had 9 cabins and boats, motors, store, restaurant. We had a lot of people come through on a weekly basis. And so what ended up happening one day as I was working at Birch Lodge, right in the middle with my parents, is a woman came in. She took a bit of interest in my life, and I told her, yeah, I have this plan to drive across Canada. And at the time, she noticed that I was doing some cycling around the trails of Birch Lodge, mainly because I didn't run fast enough for the mosquitoes to evade me. So I had to bicycle because it was the only way not to get eaten alive in training for the military. And she said, why don't you just bicycle Canada? It's way better. And I said, oh. And this little thing shifted in me and said, yeah, I think that's what we're going to do. And actually the next day I signed up for it with Lauren, and neither one of us owned a bicycle, let alone a good bicycle. But he was also a fellow adventurer, so he joined on for the Tour de Canada tour in 2004. So here we are, brand new to cycling, dipping our wheels in the Pacific Ocean, which caused no end of havoc actually, because we didn't know how to change a tire at that point or fix all the sand that was getting into our gears and bike parts. But luckily we were on a tour with about 30 other people who didn't know, so we learned a lot on that tour. And I realized there's a lot to learn about bicycles and a lot to learn about bike culture. And I was listening and trying to absorb it. And one thing some of the cyclists kept talking about was this Tour d'Afrique, this big epic bicycle journey. And that same little voice said, yep, one day you're going to do that. And so I shelved that for a while until it couldn't be shelved any longer because I was working in Ottawa and a job offer for Egypt popped up on my teaching screen, like that through the board email. And I just thought, this is it, this is the moment. So I moved to Egypt, which was a little different than my life in Canada. There's 10 million people that live in Cairo, and there's 14 million in Ontario. So it was very congested, very loud and chaotic, and a very unique and different culture to what I've experienced my entire life. But it was a real blessing to be exposed to just another way of thinking and try and see where you, like as an observer, where you fit into this new life. So I was there from 2009 to 2012, or yes, 2012. And in 2011, right around this time of year, we had the Arab Spring happen while I was living there. So that was interesting. It started with Police Day on the 25th of January, 2011. The police were very corrupt in Egypt. And it wasn't, I don't say that maliciously, some of it was because they didn't make a living wage. So it was expected that they took bribery and they took different ways to support their family. But there were a lot of very young men with guns out in the streets, and they were often very corrupt. So on the 25th of January, people protested on Police Day, and it turned into the Arab Spring, which I'm sure most of you know the result of, which is Mubarak was overthrown. And something that happened during that time period is I realized that they didn't really have to protect us or help us, but they did. So we had become an extended member of their community, even though they had their own families and their own community to protect. They joined us in that, and I thought that was a really nice moment to realize that even though we were being hosted by this culture, when things went a little, to the spin of the dangerous, they included us in the people that they were trying to support and protect, and I thought that was really lovely. So I'm going to start with us driving to the pyramids from the Cataract Hotel, and I do highlight this because it was a surprise to everybody on staff except for me that the police did not show up to help us that day. They were supposed to escort us to the pyramids, and they didn't, which I don't know if anyone's been to Egypt, but the lines on the road, you shouldn't even bother wasting paint. They don't mean a single thing to drivers there. They are all over the place. So it was a little scary for most people. So I'm going to just read you a little passage about our drive to the pyramids. Can everybody hear me? Is it loud enough? Okay, great. The police didn't show up that morning, and so we set out on what seemed like a suicide mission. We would convoy through the traffic without police support. Anyone who has visited the streets of Cairo knows that the lines on the road are a waste of paint. Laughable and without the power of suggestion, you would expect a veteran of Cairo traffic to stand immobilized at the thought of pedaling through such mayhem. But in actual fact, things were not as they appeared. In truth, the drivers around Cairo were extremely used to one important thing: reacting to the unexpected. They dodged misbehaving donkeys and erratic scooters as if life were a video game with serious repercussions. Most things were dodged successfully. Arguably, the drivers in Cairo were more welcoming of 40 insane cyclists than their Canadian counterparts would have been. With endless highways, Canadians are lulled into a dreamlike state of apathy, resulting in disaster. but no living Kyrian driver has ever been accused of daydreaming at the wheel. Before that terrifyingly final word, go, I wriggled my way to the front of the pack. Starting at the front meant that I could slowly drop to the back of the pack as long as I made a big show of socializing with everyone along the way. Thus, cyclists would consider me extremely social and not horribly out of shape. This plan did not work. I swiftly fell to the rear within the first few moments with no spectacle of socialization. And I contemplated the many species of animals that kill their weakest link for survival, while repeatedly thanking our Homo sapien overdeveloped prefrontal cortex. The bike trip staff also showed their true colors. I was immediately impressed with their willingness to place themselves in sacrificial roles to protect the sheep. Perhaps the sheer spectacle of 40 disoriented cyclists on these deadly roads was just enough to shock the locals into submission, but our staff managed the impossible. They stopped road traffic at every intersection we crossed. No local egos were visibly bruised, and we all made it to the pyramids intact and ready to begin our grand adventure. Success. I do have a little video, which I was hoping to show you, but I'll set it up after on my computer, and you can see what this drive looked like. It was arguably quite organized, which shocked me a little bit. But yeah, the roads in Egypt are quite a spectacle, but they are very used to reacting. So it actually, I knew we would be, I knew there was a chance we'd be okay. And we were. So we started our cycle down Egypt, and we had, throughout the whole tour, we had about 20 rest days, and they'd often try and plan it at places where there was a big, like, very exciting event to see, like the Ngorongoro crater. We went on safari, or the Okavango Delta, which I'll show you later, or the Karnak Temple, which is right here. Now this temple took 1,500 years to be built, and they started 2000 BC. So when you go there, there's just something that I've never really experienced in Canada, because I know things are old, but we don't have these monuments to life back then here in the same way. So these are just unbelievably large pillars that make you feel infinitesimal. They make you feel so small. And you can picture kids from eons past playing hide and go seek amongst them. And you just really feel like where you are sort of in place and time, and how that connects to the past and possibly to the future too. So this was it was really nice to get a few days off here and there to really soak into the culture. And this was a pretty meaningful one for a lot of people. This is how we got from Egypt to Sudan. It was the Lake Nasser Aswan ferry boat, which at first glance looks quite sturdy and wonderful, until you realize that there's only one per week, and that a lot of people don't leave their belongings at home when they voyage across to a new country. They bring them all with them. So everybody piling onto this boat had their entire household worth of belongings with them. Like, we had fridges on backs being carried onto it, and we had sofas. And for some reason, which I never got to the bottom to, we had meters and meters of red shag carpet. I don't know why. I researched it. I could not find the reason. But so this ferry boat we thought it really defies the laws of physics, that it stays afloat. And it was an interesting time for us to really recognize that we are outsiders looking in, and there will be clashes of culture. And I'm going to read to you a little section about that. But just to put it in context, there were only a few cabins we could stay in, and we were over 60 people. So a lot of people volunteered to sleep on the upper deck underneath the stars. Very romantic, right? There were a lot of locals who also like to spend time on the upper deck. So I'm going to read to you a little bit about a possible clash of culture that happened on this upper deck. There were not enough ferry cabins to go around. Many cyclists elected to sleep under the stars that night, which in theory sounded very romantic and adventurous. While I was snug in my safe little tiny cabin, a dozen or so cyclists and staff got cozy in their sleeping bags on the ship's deck, settling in for a night's rest. Or so they thought. In romanticizing the Lake Nasser side of the upper deck, riders forgot to take one thing into account. In countries that celebrate Ramadan, nighttime is not always for resting. I learned this with working with students who fasted. In order to reduce the discomfort of fasting, families would often deliberately reverse their days and nights. They would begin their days at midnight waking, enjoying meals, heading to school, and then they would fall asleep upon returning home. This would maximize enjoyable waking hours and reduce the challenges of the hard fast. Day and night were not analogous to waking and sleeping. This was proven on our adventurous ferryboat ride. Opportunists often functioned best under the cloak of darkness, and cyclists on the upper deck awoke to find their food eaten and water drunk. And some locals were now pleasantly full and tired, fast asleep, hugging cyclists for warmth, which made for a very awkward morning. We became another story for them, and stories and experiences are true sources of pride when your prized possession include dozens of meters of right shag carpeting. We had entered their world, and it was our expectations that were out of place. So that was just a funny moment. A lot of cyclists woke up with a nice local snuggling beside them. The local had feasted on all, shared what was up there. It was quite comical. Everybody had a good laugh over it. So we entered Sudan, and right away the whole pace of things shifted. We entered into a desert, a 50-degree desert, Wadi Halfa, with a lot of camels. And the camels are very polite, actually. You can cycle right through over to camels, and they kind of make a little path for you. They're polite in some ways, but not others. They don't show signs of illness or of problems until they just keel over and die. So that makes for certain activities like camel safari quite dangerous, which they don't always tell you. So we were in the middle of this desert. As you can see, there's very little shade, and there's very little areas to mark routes. I think the next slide shows the little villages that we would come upon. So sometimes staff could use red flagging tape to show us where we turned or to show us which direction to go in. Some of these little villages had little places. Often we'd drive through and the kids would have made a little headband out of it and we're running around the village. We'd say, where did that come from? They'd look at us like we were crazy. But sometimes there weren't even villages quite often. So the locals, or the staff tour, used something quite unconventional to mark our routes. They would tell us where to go via dead camel. So as the trade went from Sudan to Egypt, the camel trade, a lot of them, again, don't show signs of weakness, would just keel over and die in the Sudanese desert. And there's so little water there, 40 to 50 degrees, that their bodies would take a very long time to decay. So the staff organizers who'd done this tour multiple times knew that they were a reliable landmark, and they would use them as such. So I'm going to read you a little section about camels and their place on tour. Camels invented the poker face. Camels would rather die than reveal their hand to their herders. Expert bluffers, camels will maintain their appearance of grandeur until the very last breath. When they go down, they take you with them. In Egypt, we all knew to avoid camel safaris, and we would secretly giggle when our paths crossed a camel safari, watching all the tourists walking painstakingly behind their unencumbered camels. They're not very comfortable. Not only are camels supremely uncomfortable, they are also dangerous. One moment a camel is chauffeuring you around the desert with zero signs of poor health, and the next moment the camel is keeling over dead and you are riding its death to the ground. Many tourists have been pinned under dead camels, and some died tragically. Every time I saw a camel, I was reminded of death. However, in a few days, that would change completely. Since the early 1900s, Sudanese camel herders have been marching their herd from western Sudan to a village north of Aswan for sale, and the camels transported to the world's largest camel market in Cairo, Egypt, where they were sold for slaughter. It is estimated that over 50,000 camels make their death march to Egypt annually. Modern transportation has seen a decline in herders willing to make this grueling march. Still, camel carcasses line the route. And when death comes to you in the middle of the Sahara Desert, it triumphantly showcases your body. You lay there where you fall, eternally exhibited in a death museum. Your display case is a strictly controlled environment, no water, no life to feast upon your remains, no decay. Well, little decay over many decades. Dead camels serve two purposes. The first being route identifiers. The camels remained so intact that tour organizers used individual camel corpses as landmarks. The second purpose I was to discover the next day when my own carcass almost laid to rest in the Great Sahara Open Air Death Museum. So the very next day I had a moment, which is much more fully explained in the book, where I ran out of water and I knew I didn't have long. And my next thought was, I'm going to have to climb inside a dead camel for shade, which was a horrible thought. Luckily, my last tire held and I was able to make it to camp, but I was extremely dehydrated after that. So that the book talks a little bit about that, but the dead camels as a route identifiers I thought was quite unique. Everywhere we went, people would come out and a lot of them would dance by the side of the road. I have a video of that I can show you. Or they would celebrate, or they just show curiosity. There were 3 questions that we heard a lot. Where are you coming from? Where are you going to? And what are you doing? Are you mad? So these women will always forever stick in my mind. They were a little village, they had very little, thatched roof, very small village, not a lot of water, almost no food. And we entered this village and all of these brightly colored, beautiful women came out trilling and celebrating and ushered us, like kind of went around us and ushered us into their village and gave us tea and showed us around with pride. And I thought that was another moment where I thought our culture has drifted away from this in a way that I think is lacking in people. Now specifically, now COVID's made this a bit worse, but this idea of celebrating in community like you're doing today is really something that I think makes people happy. That's what I realized when I went there. I saw a lot, I went in expecting to see a lot of sadness and hunger and starvation, and I came out realizing that they're rich in a way that we're not actually, which is based on community and their value of it. So I have a little bit about them to read to you. They really will always be in my mind as an example of how generous people can be when they know what it's like not to have. Okay. The gang awoke to the promise of a piddly 84-kilometer day off the beaten path. Little did we know it would be agonizing. This was to be our last full day in Sudan, and true to form, Sudan would send us off with both extreme highs and extreme lows. The morning was promising as we rode with Ian and Marianne on gentle dirt roads through picturesque towns. We entered a new village, and we were quickly ushered down a small side street into the heart of the village. We dismounted in awe. Close to 100 stunningly vibrant women and children were singing, dancing, and beating hand drums. Their clothing was bold, bright, and beautiful, and in stunning contrast to their flawless dark skin. At first I thought we had happened upon a wedding, but there were no men present. It soon became clear that they were celebrating us. They were exuberantly trilling and encouraging us to join in. We were served a hibiscus drink and showed the inside of the town. There were glorious women who we considered to live in abject poverty, giving freely what they had to us, their guests. I was incredibly moved and saddened to think that my own culture had drifted so far from these nourishing roots. Their communal bond allowed them joy and happiness beyond measure. How did we get to a point of not knowing our neighbors, of locking front doors, of creating parking spaces at the expense of porches? No wonder mental health issues continue to rise at alarming rates in developed countries. We have annihilated the concept central to humanity, togetherness, and community. The women were unforgettable ambassadors to a country who recognized their blessings deeply. This pure sense of joy could only come to a heart bolstered by familial community, and I will never forget these women. So that was a really nice moment for me on tour. And then some locals did come out and support us in a different way. So we hadn't showered in over a week at this point, and we were probably pretty stinky. So this man decided he would drag his donkey over with a giant, oh my goodness, I'm losing my word now. You can help me. Full of water.
A barrel.
Thank you. A giant barrel full of water. And we sat in a bucket, as you can see, and he siphoned water over our heads to help us to not stink quite so much. And it was, to this day, the best shower I've ever had. We called it the donkey shower, and there's been no shower like this shower. This was my fondest shower. The donkey thought we were a bit nuts, but the man, it cost us, $1, not even, and he was overjoyed. So it was really a great moment. So this is who I primarily cycled with. I cycled with a gang. We called ourselves the gang. We were a gang of girls, girl gang from all over different countries of the world. So Marita was Irish, Esther was from Australia. I'm right in the middle. Femco was from the Netherlands, and Jenny from England. So Marita in particular had, as a lot of Irish people do, had a tremendous sense of fun about her. And she said, we have to give people things to talk about or else they'll talk about each other. So she said, okay, every time we cross a border, we're going to dress up and we're going to celebrate the border crossing. So here we are, she had found these little life preservers at a small shopping mall nearby, and we have our bike pumps attached to our heads, and we would come up with these small costumes to do something to commemorate and make fun of, like have a little bit of fun together, not make fun of. And the spin-off of this, I talk a lot about our border crossings, is the locals really got into it. So here we are at customs, and she is wearing a piece of one of our costumes, and it would often create a really easy sort of introduction to communication, which was really, and they just loved to laugh. Every border crossing, they just loved seeing us come in and giggling with us and connecting with us in this fun way. So that was a nice idea that Rita had, and it worked fairly well. I think we got through Africa with relatively low drama with a group of 60 people. So,
passports work?
They did, yeah. There was a shady moment for me because I was in Ethiopia. You have to get a very specific passport ahead of time. And they only give, I think I'm going back years now, I think it's only 4 months, but they had to give me a 5-month one because I was living in Egypt and it had to cover the extra month that I was living in Egypt. And so I didn't know if it would work. I thought they'd think I was a fraud, but it did, thankfully. So I was always living on pins and needles, but I think they were so busy with our costumes they probably didn't notice that it was an unusual one. One thing that troubled me at first was, and I think it's common trouble of people who do this type of activity, is you are a very big visible sign of wealth in an impoverished country, which has, it's a tricky situation to navigate because you're not sure, number one, if it's a good idea to even do this type of tour. One thing that attracted me to this tour in particular is we were staying in mud villages, we were camping, we were staying in places that tourists just simply don't go, and we were infusing a lot of money into those places. So when we went there, they did seem, almost everybody really did seem to embrace us and enjoy us being there. There were, of course, some exceptions, but I felt like, not that it made it okay or justified, again, sort of visible display of have and have not, but it was nice that I think it did support a lot of these smaller villages that don't always have a lot. So this is one little community in Ethiopia, and there were also planned events. Like this was a donation. We got to donate money to get kids to school and donate bicycles. Bicycle was it's a big boon in Africa, so we gave this community about 12 bicycles to support, and they just love dancing. Ethiopians are amazing dancers, and so they put on a dance for us, and these 3 little girls they're unbelievable. So it was nice to see that we could give back along the way, but it definitely is a moral question that you're left with the whole way, to be honest with you. So here, women through Africa, I realized, are A, the backbone, and B, the hardest working people you'll meet. Men are responsible for livestock, but women have everything else. They build houses, they carry firewood, they rear children, they take care of the elderly. They're the builders and the constructors of community. And so I think what they do best is form communities like this group of women. You can't see it, but they're all barefoot. They're carrying all kinds of building materials on their back to help build up their house. And they really, really believe in supporting each other. So here they are carrying some water on their heads, just amazing. Again, barefoot or very skimpy sandals, and just a lot of work just to stay alive, right? But something that we don't have, which is they do it together. They don't do it by themselves, which is nice. Here's Ethiopia again. So we started at the bottom, and we cycled all the way up, and then a goat licked all the salt off our legs because we were so disgusting. So that's a fond memory of mine. The goat he wouldn't let us get away. He just kept wanting a little snack of salt. So I thought that was pretty funny. Okay, then we entered Kenya, and Kenya was just filled with lava rocks from Mount Marsabit, and they're like this size and jagged and pointy and sharp. And you just, as a non-cyclist, you look at this road and you think, I can't cycle this. This is impossible to cycle. Especially with, smaller tires and bikes that maybe are more designed for roads. It just seemed like an impossible task. But I was very humbled at this section because I met someone who changed my perspective on the impossible. And I'm going to read to you now about the lava rock section. The romanticism of cycling off-road can only exist if your life isn't in peril. It was. We were on a road that brought an adult motorist to tears in his well-equipped car. "Nobody comes here," was the reaction of a Kenyan cyclist who had joined the tour as a sectional rider when asked if he had ever cycled these roads before. We had to cycle 87 kilometers over 2 tiny tire ruts entirely covered with black menacing rocks, fist size or larger. The gang set out to cycle the unforgiving maze, our eyes straining under the constant pressure of finding one safe route. We glanced up every so often on the lookout for curious giraffes, dik-diks, and balloons strung along the path. Glancing, we would lose sight of our route and fall. Sharp, hot rocks threatened our every fall, and we fell so frequently that we started classifying falls. Sissy falls consisted of our tires spinning out in slow motion and us lacking the mental wherewithal to unclip our feet before tumbling to the ground. And the more prestigious captain's fall happened when our bike slipped off a sharp rock, forcing us to quickly topple over sideways. None of the gang members had any balance, and suddenly we were passed by a cyclist with one leg. Dedan Ireri was a 31-year-old Kenyan cyclist, and he had lost his right leg tragically as a child beggar in Nairobi when a car ran him over. Dedan found his passion for cycling and became a bike courier for Jamai Bora Bank. In 2008, he qualified for the Paralympics in Beijing. Dedan was fast, focused, and steady. Dedan skillfully weaved the impossible maze of lava with balance and precision of a surgeon operating on a tightrope. We ate his one-legged dust in absolute awe. Where the rest of us lumbered clumsily, Dedan floated gracefully by, making the playing ground look effortless, as only the most skilled of athletes has the ability to do. He greeted us warmly with a huge smile and a wave, as passion oozed out of his every pore. Dedan was pure inspiration. We rocked and rolled over volcanic lava, and I wondered aloud whether internal organs could dislodge. Egrets flew overhead looking like toilet paper billowing in the wind, and a sharp contrast to the red sands and black rocks under our tire treads. And I marveled at how the rules had shifted again. Kenya's spirit and rhythm was unlike that of frenetic Ethiopia. In Kenya, nature sang and swayed with a tangible beat that felt like the universal heartbeat. Whereas Ethiopia's energy had highs and lows, Kenyans felt steady. So that's Dedan. It's quite amazing. You just needed to see it. Yeah, it was unbelievable. We were falling all over the place multiple times a day, and he was with his one leg, he was able to weave through this at Olympic speeds. It was just unbelievable. Yeah. So there was very little, again, shade in northern Kenya, very dry desert type conditions, and every so often we would find a tree for shade, but this would be the case, that all the other animals in the local area were already using it, and we weren't quite brave enough to shoo them away. So we ended up having a lot of heat-related days that required a lot of hydration en route. But we met a lot of very amazing cultures in northern Kenya. We're bused for a little bit because some of the cultures can get, it's a tribal area, so they can have some conflict between them, and a lot of these tribes, not a lot, I should say, some of these tribes don't believe in photography. They think it steals part of your soul. So the tour organizers were very, very careful to tell us that there's been big issues in the past with people, in particular people who can't put away their camera for a second, getting into trouble with some of these tribes. And we had one man on tour who took probably literally 1,000 photos a day, and they actually followed him because they didn't trust him. So the tour organizers would drive behind him just to make sure he stayed safe. But some of the cultures taught us some of their ways. So here is one of the cyclists learning how to throw a spear. And this is on our way into the Ngorongoro crater in Tanzania, where we were greeted with just unbelievable wildlife. So flamingos, there was one lake that was entirely pink. It was beautiful. Zebras, we saw lion hunt and kill, and hyenas, which Disney surprisingly portrays in a very realistic light. they sound very menacing, and the rule was in the tent that you never had a body part out of the tent and they wouldn't bother you. But don't leave a body part out of your tent because hyenas are scavengers. And we saw that actually, the lion made his kill, and all the hyenas came in and they bothered the lion so much that he left, and they got the leftovers because they're persistent. They're like flies on a meal. They just make you, like, they're so persistent that the lion gave up. Excuse me. So we also saw a lot of these from the bicycle. We saw zebras, we saw elephants, which I'll tell you a little bit about. We saw giraffes, lots of wildlife from the bicycle itself. So we'll talk about that in a second. Here's a little giraffe from the bicycle. And we entered into, this. So everywhere we went, the gang always liked to have a lot of fun. And this was a little town that we went into, and there was some really good music playing. So we started dancing, and then these men joined us, and we were dancing in a circle. And then the entire village came out and joined, and the entire village was dancing together. And the tour organizer drove by in the truck and stopped, came out, and realized that we had started an entire community dancing party. And it was just, she said she'd never seen that on tour before. So it was a really nice moment. It made me feel like humanity is so connected. We all like the same type. We all like fun. We all like dance. We all like joy and again, building community. So it was a real nice moment on the tour for me, one that's very memorable. Yeah, he's wearing my friend's bike helmet. I don't know if you can tell. And Marita, of course, the Irish one, she's wearing his hat. He was wearing that hat before. Yeah. Kids also universally love to have fun, and they were so curious and so great with us. Other than in Ethiopia, they kept throwing rocks at us, and it was really unnerving because when you're clipped into a bicycle and a rock's coming at you, you think you're very vulnerable, right? And so we had a lot of accents with that until we went to the school where you saw those girls dancing and realized that that's how the teachers get the kids' attention. They whip rocks at them. So they weren't actually doing it to us to be mean, they're just curious about us. They're trying to get our attention. That's how they got attention. You whip a rock at people. So it was really interesting. So the kids, I think, are kids everywhere. They're not. So the trouble we ran into, again, came from our perspective, but to them, it wasn't malicious. They were just curious and wanted to know more about these insane people that came through once a year. So this is on a beach in Malawi. Malawi was very interesting. It has a lot of water, so it's humid because it's just as hot as any other African country, but it has Lake Malawi, which provides a tremendous amount of humidity, so much so that they passed legislation in 2011 called air fouling legislation, which made it illegal to pass gas in public. I'm not kidding. It was so stinky there. I have a little bit to read to you about the Malawi sort of general smell. Observed in their In the night, our tents sunk 3 inches into mud. Our muddy, wobbly waterbeds would have been quite luxurious if humidity wasn't such a heavy blanket. It felt and smelt. I'm sorry, this is kind of gross. I should just warn you. If you don't like really disgusting things, just plug your ears for one moment. It felt and smelt like being inside a dog's mouth just after he nibbled on a few pieces of his own feces. Gross, right? I escaped my tent and regrouped. My cleansing efforts in Mbeya were completely in vain, as every single one of my belongings was drenched and disgusting. Odor waged war on my brain, and sweat smelling like sweet, acrid papaya drenched my nasal hair and refused to dry. With an estimated fifth of this landlocked country being water, nothing dried in Malawi. As we cycled from camp in oppressive heat and humidity, I felt unusual. My body sensed danger in this moist breeding ground for bacteria and viruses. My endorphins ran off in search of dry land and opened the floodgates for panic and despair. Nonetheless, we forced ourselves to move quickly and race to the local grocery store. Sharita, who was our tour leader, had ordered us to do so, or else starve. The choice was ours. For the next 2 nights, we would stay at Chitimba Camp on Lake Malawi. Although they easily housed and fed over 60 guests, they could not meet our voracious demand for food. According to Chitimba's camp's previous experience with Tour d'Afrique, our 62 staff and riders would eat as much as 200 normal people. They couldn't keep up with demand, so that left us with the local grocery store, which seemed to have known we were coming. American brands lined the shelves at American prices. I quickly surmised that with so many locals suffering below the poverty line, this grocer made its living on this day alone. I stocked up on cornflakes, yogurts, chips, and Malawi gin. Our appetites whetted, Marita, Esther, and I got back on our bikes and headed towards camp. We lost our appetite within a few kilometers as we breathed in the remaining moisture of dehydrating sardines. And remembering how they could ban flatulence but keep the world's stinkiest little fish. There they were on the beach for as far as the eye could see, thousands of sardines sunbathing on wooden racks. They would have been beautiful, but their silvery sheen was outdone by their absolutely putrid odor. Somehow, young children and their parents were blissfully sleeping in the shade underneath the sardines, as dozens of youth frolicked in the surrounding sand. When life hands you dehydrating sardines, you get the heck out of Dodge by any means necessary, which is what Marita and Esther did, commandeering a small wooden boat, unconcerned that it was already filled to the brim with exuberant youth in various stages of nudity. They jumped, toppled, and tipped into the refreshing water, laughing uproariously as I watched envious from the beach, wondering if the odor would wash out of both skin and lycra. At camp, I decided to find out. Cautiously, I dipped into Lake Malawi, the fourth most voluminous freshwater lake in the world. Although Lake Malawi looked like a tropical paradise surrounded by green tabletop mountains, birdsong, palm trees, and perfect sand, the water told a different story. It was warm and yellow, urine-filled bathwater. I exited feeling slightly less clean, yet Lake Malawi held the world's record for number of fish species with over 1,000 thriving in the murky depths. Instead of swimming, I settled on some beach volleyball and snacking, two of my favorite pastimes. And there was a campfire on the beach, which set the mood perfectly for Malawian mooncake. Mercifully, I declined. So Malawi is also sort of the country that exhibited the most sort of witch doctors and voodoo sort of style. They really believed in, the powers of certain drugs, and so a lot of riders partook in Malawian mooncake, not realizing that they would not feel their legs for another 24 hours. It's not a good idea. All around the world, the children just wanted to, again, engage and have fun, and as a teacher, any of these kids could have been all of the kids in my classroom. They really were a community upon themselves. Like, I think they would leave in the morning and support one another and then come back at the end of the day. They were really a community together. And you saw, 8-year-olds carrying their little baby sister all day long. And it was really, they had a community upon themselves.
What are they doing with their hands? Sorry.
Oh, they're going like this because we had a flat tire and they were kind of making fun of us over it. You can see it just in the background. Yeah, they're just teasing us. They love that. I grew up partially near St. Catharines, so I thought, Victoria Falls, probably a lot like, why am I missing now? Thank you. The Falls, I grew up here. So, no, not similar. Victoria Falls is just unbelievably immense in sort of the span that it takes and the amount of water that comes over, and it literally took my breath away. I think it's the first time that I've had my breath actually taken away, and maybe the last. You cannot believe what you're seeing. And some people, there's a little area at the very top that is one of those infinity pools that you can dip your toes in, and I thought, not a chance, no. But it was really quite remarkable. They have moon bows there where the moon can reflect off and create a rainbow shape at night. It's just such a beautiful, beautiful place to be. So here we are dressed up as carnival folk entering into Botswana. Botswana has more elephants than people, so we were wondering how this would go. And I have a little one, I think it's our last reading, to share with you about the elephants that we saw and whether they appreciated our carnival attire. Botswana, the only country in the world that had more elephants than people. Today we would cross into this mythical land, and the gang had planned the perfect border crossing garb, Mardi Gras costumes. Surely elephants would appreciate carnival attire. Competitive travelers love the Zambezi River. In 150-meter ferry ride, you can visit 4 countries. Travel the Zambezi River a bit farther if you wish to add a total of 6 countries to your passport: Zambia, Angola, Namibia, Botswana, Zimbabwe, and Mozambique. Hippos and crocodiles changed citizenship daily in the Zambezi River, and every country needed a piece of this truly remarkable waterway. We entered Botswana's customs and received a warm welcome. Carnies were welcome in Botswana. Jenny handed her mask to one of the officials who sported it proudly while filling out our forms. Within the first few kilometers of cycling, we spotted our first warthog, and that was thrilling enough until we peeked over the warthog's shoulder into the distance, and there was an elephant traipsing along. He was quite far in the distance and paid relatively little attention to us once he saw how we were dressed. No self-respecting elephant gives the slightest mind to carnival folk. From a safe distance, the elephant seemed small, but soon enough we would recognize our folly. But in this moment we were thrilled. The gang cycled the remaining 10 kilometers to camp and arrived just in time to sign up for the sunset cruise in Chobe National Park. Trucks were mounted and we were driven to a wide ferry boat on the bank of the Chobe River. Botswana welcomed us in style. People were an afterthought in Chobe National Park. Animals owned the land and tourists were only there for the animals' amusement. Nothing was contrived. Elephants lazily ate from trees while nearby crocodiles sunbathed. Eagles flew majestically and impalas leapt across fields. I realized that I had been misled by every nature show since birth, or perhaps I'd simply put my own human spin on things. Nature's penchant for survival was quintessential, but manifestation was not nearly as acrimonious as I had imagined. Nature lived harmoniously most of the time. Elephants could eat close to lounging crocodiles. Hippos and elephants could share swimming pools playfully together. It was all very paradisical until it wasn't. We humans sensationalized everything with our every media, focusing on fierce, emotional, triggering moments. Nature was no exception. I had grown to believe nature was in constant survival of the fittest war zone. Nothing was further from the truth. Nature was on guard, but also assured in balance. Violence was only parceled through necessity. This was harmony, codependence, and oneness. This was mutual respect. This was a better community than I had ever lived. I studied a male impala who was being trailed by a harem of 20 females, and when a female peed, the male would scruff up the ground to avoid detection. Nearby elephants played happily in the water, dunking, swimming, and splashing around in circles. Nearby, a large hippopotamus opened its mouth 180 degrees and yawned. The sunset providing the backdrop for this incredible scene was what mysteries are made of. So it was really a nice moment for me to realize it is not always, the main idea is not survival of fittest nature, it's balance. That's the main idea. And yes, there are moments where violence is necessary and survival of the fittest comes in. But it is actually what we should be learning about is how they keep each other in balance, how the animals work together. And again, predators and prey can quite happily coexist until one of them gets hungry. They happily coexist together. This is the Okavango Delta, and we went up in a plane here, and you could see all the little trails, and you could see they look like little toy elephants, little toy giraffes making all these trails through the Delta. It looked like an art display, really, truly, from up in the sky. And then here we are just as a collective group of women supporting each other. No one could have done this trip without the support of the people around them, so that was really a beautiful thing to realize. And here I am at the end with my bike lifted in the air, feeling like a cyclist for maybe one day of my life, and then, that was it. So I hope you enjoyed the presentation, and if you have any questions. I have a video I can show you. I have to just pull it up on my computer, but if you're interested. Any questions at all? Great. I'll be around.
How long were you gone?
It was a 5-month tour. So we started in January and we ended in May. Yes. I have a few things around the table. So this is actually the Arab Spring. It's a photograph. You have to look closely to see it. But these are all people holding a flag. So that was a photograph taken during the Arab Spring. These are some medals from our adventure. This is one that they hand out for completing the tour. And this one is one for particularly insane cyclists that try and get what they call EFI, which is every fabulous inch of the road. So there were options, like if you're sick or injured, you could get on a truck for a day and sit part of it out. And that happened to a lot of cyclists without, you get sick, things happen, it's a long tour. But there were a few of us who made every single day, and it was the first year, our tour organizer said it was the first year ever that they had 4 women get this medal at the same time, and it was the gang. It was all 4 of us, because we supported each other. None of us would have got this without it, but she just thought it was such an amazing thing that we were all able to do it together and, you know, at the end, share a common goal. That had never happened before, she said. So that was really nice. You couldn't bring very much back with you because we had a little storage area on a big truck. It was about this big. So you had to fit everything in there, all your tent, your belongings. And cyclists would always try and hide things around the truck, but every so often there'd be a culling, and I have this very funny picture of, I don't know if anybody's seen Canada's Worst Driver, but the host of the show, Andrew Younghusband, was on this tour with us, and he has a picture of himself with all of his belongings piled on the back of his bicycle, just almost like a logo, because he didn't want to give them up just yet, and eventually he realized that you can give up belongings, you're going to be okay, the world will take care of you, but at that point he's just laid it down with, I think he even had like a pot, I don't know what he was doing with all of this stuff, but anyway. So we didn't have a lot of room, but I was able to get these 2 little guys and bring them back. And this is from Egypt, it's a backgammon board made with mother of pearl. And then a few little things that I got in Africa, not again on the tour, it would have taken too much space, but in the countries that I voyaged through a bit later. I've been to Kenya twice now. And here the gang won an award for being the spirit of TDA, so all of us got this special little plaque, which is now beaten and bruised, but it's quite meaningful. And at the end of the day, if you're ever the fastest, you get a little plaque that says stage win. And I, on like the 3rd last day of tour, decided that I would try for it, and I think everybody just wanted me to get this, so they slowed down. And they let me do it, which was lovely. Again, community, right? And then there's all kinds of pictures here. But yeah, thank you. Hopefully.
So you had these trucks that were carrying this stuff. Did they set up your tents ahead of you?
They don't set up your tents, but they do provide you with meals. So there would be a lunch truck. So we would meet the lunch truck halfway, and they'd have a lunch set up, and we would eat voraciously. And then at the end, they'd often give all the leftover food to the children who would be nearby. And you've never seen, I don't think, there's a part in the book where I talk about it, but I don't think I've ever felt as happy as those kids. It was just, and maybe the less you have, the more you feel, I don't know, but it was a real moment, like just to see, and then you felt guilty because, you know, you're stuffing your face and stuff happening. So there were a lot of ethical moments on tour like that.
But then when you got into camp, you had to set your tent and get all of that.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
They, again, provided supper, but on the video that I have, it shows the whole setup and tear down of the main truck. But yeah, you set up your tent. And tents lasted or didn't last depending on, some days were very windy, and we'd have a lot of sectional riders. So at the end of they'd come for 2 weeks. And then most of the time we'd be like scavengers. Hey, can I have your tent? Can I have your tubes? Can I have, and we'd buy everything that they didn't need anymore off of them because everything started to fall apart at a certain point. Just from way up to here.
How many started and how did they all finish?
So we had about 40 full tour riders, and not everybody finished for usually due to injury. We did have quite a few broken bones and quite a few. There were moments, like I was held up at gunpoint at one point. There were moments on tour that, you know, make you wonder about what you're doing, but more moments were realizing how many people were working together to keep us safe, right? Like most of the world works to keep you safe and works to help you achieve your goals, and there are little moments here and there, but anything that's such a long 5-month voyage is bound to have, you know, some things happen. So there were, I think, about 12 people finished every day, and I think at the end we've only probably lost about 5 or 6, and some of them came back, and some of them finished the tour the next year. So we had one gentleman who broke his hip, and he finished the tour the next year. He came back and finished the next year. Yeah.
How hot was it every day? What was the temperature generally?
Yes, it depends on where we were, but I think the hottest we probably found was about 50 to 55 degrees.
I can't believe that. And you could pedal a bicycle.
Well, it helped me a lot to have lived in Egypt before this, because they start in our winter, right? They start around like a few weeks ago. So it's a Canadian organization that runs this. A lot of Canadians go on this tour, and they go from -20 to +50. So that is hard, and some people weren't able to manage that kind of temperature change. But having lived in Egypt, I think I was quite acclimatized and ready for the temperature change.
Wow.
Yeah, and I think the coolest would be in the desert at night. It gets quite cool actually, because there's no clouds to hold the heat in. So some nights we were actually, bundled up, in the desert. Yes.
What happened to the dude? Did he ever come with you?
Oh, the dude.
Yeah.
Yeah, the dude. So we did the Canada tour together, and then so on that tour actually, we made very good friends with another couple, and they ended up on this tour just out of coincidence with us. So I did have some people I knew that I realized day one were there, but he did not come on this because at that point he was busy getting married and having a family, which is probably what I was 31 when I did this tour. So most of my friends are at a different point, yeah. And I realize they're smart now that I'm 40 and have a 2-year-old at home because, yeah, they require a lot of energy, which might have been smart to do in my 30s. But there seemed to be 2 age brackets on the tour. There were people over 50 or 60, and there were people under 28. And a lot of people under 28 were out of university. Often they had experienced a loss and they were looking to put some of the money they had gained to a big event so they could some life goal, right? So because it was expensive, so a lot of younger people were doing it to commemorate someone that they lost in their life. Yeah, there were exceptions to all that, right? But that was generally what I noticed. And then there were some in their 40s and some of it, but it's harder to ask your employer for 5 months off, or bring your children along. We keep trying to convince them to put sidecards, but they're not doing it. Yes.
What can you share strategies of being held at gunpoint to get out of that situation?
Yes. Well, so this happened in Egypt. After the revolution, I decided I was going to learn Arabic because it was actually quite scary to know that there was a lot of political unrest and not know what was being said or what was actually happening. I remember we were held up in a little apartment and we would hear gunfire, and then we'd wait to see if people were clapping or not, to see if it was positive or negative. Like, we had no idea what was going on. And I thought, I need to learn the language. Like, this is it. So the next year I learned Arabic. I had a private tutor and I spent a lot of my time trying to learn the language. And so when I was held up, what happened was, I was, again, not a cyclist. So I got in as the sun went down one day, and we were on a beach in Egypt. And there had been a rider meeting. And in the rider meeting, the tour organizer had said, don't go down to that beach, because it's a big drug trafficking beach and there's a big police presence down there. Don't go there. But I didn't hear that because I was, still on the road. So I did go down to the beach, and then suddenly there were 2 police officers with their AK-47s pointing at me and my friends. And at the time, I used my Arabic, and truthfully, I used my broken Arabic to try and explain what was happening, and I think that helped a lot. I think that helped a lot, and they escorted us back up, but it was a little alarming at first. And even in Egypt, with some of the kids who were again throwing stones at us, it helped a lot to know a bit of Arabic, because I would have a whole group with me because I didn't feel safe, and I'd slow right down and I'd look at the kids and I'd say, I know your mother. And they would drop their stones and run away, and we'd cycle through really quickly. It was really funny. Yeah, they were shocked. I think somebody who looks like me speaking Arabic who might know their mother, so they didn't throw stones at us. They gave me quite a following. And I told them, I'm going slow, but this is something I can do, so to keep us safe. And at the end, I had about 20 people with me because it was dangerous. Like, we had a lot of people who fell off their bikes, and sometimes sugar cane and wheels and type of they were. And it's just kids, again, and interested in who we are and what we're doing, right? And playful. Yeah. Yes.
One Canadian tour company who took you on back roads. I didn't see a city.
Oh yes, it was mostly back roads. The reason you don't see a lot of cities in here is because they generally look similar, and they're not the part that really spoke to me as much. Like, we did end up in Addis Ababa, yeah, but it was the cities had their own flavor to them, their own vibe. But really, what I loved was getting to know locals in small villages or fishing villages or whatnot. So we did tend to have rest days in bigger places, like in the capital city of each country. But it wasn't, they all sort of looked like one of the first pictures I had here. They all, most of them, not all, most of them kind of looked like this. Not as interesting to broadcast, yeah. And different, yeah, harder to get into the culture in a city than a small town, because there's so many of them there, right?
18 countries with political elections this year?
Yes, yeah, and a lot of corruption in that process, right, so it's hard. System. We did go through cities, but to me, it wasn't my favorite part.
Now, Janet, you said you weren't a cyclist, or you weren't a cyclist. The ladies that you were hooked up with, and the group of you, any of them cyclists in your, or were you all at about the same?
Yeah, we were all about the same. None of us were too serious at the beginning. Since then, Esther from Australia has moved on to do a lot of cycling. Jenny probably does some too, she's from England, and Femke actually from Netherlands is she probably was the most cyclist, like the biggest cyclist before this tour. But none of us, other than probably Femke and Esther, do it every day. Like, I would do another tour like this in a heartbeat, but I do it to travel. None of us are cyclists who would like join a peloton and stare at the wheel in front of us and draft. And some people race down Africa, and I feel like that would not be for me, because all you would see was the wheel ahead of you. And sure, at the end you might get a chance to say you were the fastest racer down Africa, but to me the experiences were wrong.
That is not to say how difficult and how strenuous and how much effort it took to go all those many miles.
Oh, my.
People tell me that when they read the book they feel that.
I read the book.
Did you feel it? Did you feel the pain with me?
Yeah, these are the details that don't come over in a presentation
Yes.
like this.
Yeah.
And also the emotional journey that we took.
Yes.
And the cultural journey, existential journey was really, really something more than just geography and distance. And I saw your medal. You never made it all that clear in the book that you had earned that.
Well, I think that's because what I wanted to make clear at the end of the book is that it didn't matter at the end anymore. It mattered greatly at the beginning. It was a goal that I set, but at the end I realized that the big goal, all the adventures that happened in the journey, and actually that medal meant very little at the end. It was just something that I put on a table now. I know it means something, but it wasn't the goal.
I still want to see it.
Yeah, oh yeah, you're welcome to see it. Absolutely, but it wasn't the overall. When I went on tour with the hopes of achieving, no longer was what I had hoped to achieve on the tour, I guess.
Wow, well said. All right, well, I started off to thank Jana. And I will do that. Everybody wanted to say I've read the book, I've seen the movie, and now I've met the author and the star. Excellent, excellent presentation. Thank you very much. On behalf of the Friends of Wellington Library, my job is thank you. I'm also the chief chair putter up. I can appreciate some help to put the chair away. Anyway, our next presentation is going to be a Saturday hence, starting a half hour later, and take us to Japan, metaphorically. Carson Arthur is going to talk about Japanese flower arranging and do a demonstration. We'd be really lucky, you might be able to take one of them home. But anyways, it adds this dimension to our series that we call Passion Series. Many of you know about it already. Our final session will be 2 weeks hence, and it will feature Steve Campbell, who I don't think needs any introduction. And you know what he'll be talking about. It's entitled The County Then and Now, and he's in a good position to do that. But we're so happy that you came today and that you decided to settle in the county in your journey. I hope you stay here.
Well, we have a plan. We might be moving to Mexico next year, so we might come back.
Well, I've been to Africa, I've been to Mexico.
Well,
So I didn't.
you can tell me all.
Okay. So that wraps up our session today, and I don't have any further announcements tonight.
Jana brought a few of her books if anyone is
Oh,
interested
yes.
in purchasing them.
Yes, Jana brought some of her books, which I highly recommend. It's also available in the library, and they're proceeds,
Half the proceeds go to the TDA Foundation, which gives bicycles to a lot of the remote villages in Africa that we cycle through. So provides them, bicycles are quite a big change to lifestyle in there. So, and it allows people to realize how much we're not great at cycling when we cycle through these towns again. And they're like, good job. Pardon me, it's $15. Yeah.
that's available right now. There's another book that has been donated to the library collection in Jana's name, and the book is Anansi the Spider, Tales of the Ashanti. Beyond that, I don't. Here's a little token of our appreciation.
Thank you so
A little
much.
souvenir card.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. I really appreciate it.